All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, using Plotly and R to create and update online dashboards. I'm Charlie Ferrari, lead the application engineering team at Plotly, and I'll be leading us today. So hello, everyone, and let's get started. So we'll start off just going through a few slides here. So welcome to the webinar. And just to highlight a few upcoming webinars, do some housekeeping before we get started with the content. We do have another Python webinar coming up about building web applications with Dash. And then we have another one coming up in December about building online dashboards with Excel. And a few other housekeeping notes in terms of this webinar. And for all webinars, replays will be available. The code that I'm using will be available. And if you ever see me pause or the webinar stop, just refresh your page and you'll be able to hopefully get caught up again. And we also have a conference, PlotCon, coming up November 14th through 17th in New York City. So the venue is in the financial district, and you'll be able to buy tickets at plotcon.plot.ly. And if you're interested in this webinar, be sure to check out the Plotly and R Masterclass. Carson is the lead Plotly R developer. He pretty much built the R API from scratch, so he'll be a great resource to help get everyone acquainted with using Plotly and R. So let's get started with the content that we'll be going through. Just to kind of give a broad intro to Plotly, it is multifaceted. There are lots of different ways to use Plotly. Plotly, underlying everything, is a JavaScript library. So it could be used directly for web development in that way. But Plotly has an ecosystem surrounding it that makes it easier for data scientists to use no matter which environment they're in. So in this case, today we'll be going through the Plotly API for R. But there are various APIs available for Python, MATLAB, and a few other languages. There's also plot.ly and Plotly on-premise, and these are the web ecosystems for Plotly. So it is possible to build Plotly visualizations using our online chart editor. We won't be getting into that just yet. We'll be focusing on dashboards. And Plotly can be accessed via the web using professional accounts or using our enterprise on-premise server. The on-premise server is available in a Docker container and can be put behind your company's firewall. And if you go to Plotly/products, you'll get more information about the different account options that you have. So going from community, starting out with free public charts, and then all the way up to on-premise or professional. So with that, we'll be moving towards working in R. So starting out, we'll be in RStudio, and we'll slowly make our way to the online ecosystem. We'll be using Plotly, the dashboard creator, to actually create our dashboard and kind of show how everything, all aspects of the ecosystem are linked. So how you're able to use the R API to update graphs on the dashboard. So if you want to, so first we'll just bring in some data. And the data that we'll be working with is a an overview of Fortune 100 companies. So we're going to look at some data list of companies across various states and different stats about those companies. Now with this data, we plan on creating several charts that give us different views of this, and we're going to end up with a fully made dashboard. So here you could see the what we're going to end up with. So using the dashboard creator, you're able to create pretty compelling presentations such as this. So to get started, we'll start building our plots. So we basically have 4 graphs that we want to build here, and we'll just build them one by one in R and kind of show how you could end up in a dashboard like this. So on one level, you're able to use Plotly just like any other plotting package within RStudio, within R. So in this way, it's comparable to a package like ggplot. If you're doing exploratory work within RStudio, you're able to use Plotly to kind of explore your data in that way. But now we'll be getting into presenting that data, kind of the next stage of the data science workflow. So starting out, we'll just get a comparison of how many companies are in each state. So when you are using this like graphing package, you're able to view Plotly graphs fully interactive within your within RStudio. And and you're able to just explore your data in this way and sort of look at how many companies are there and kind of just get a handle of what your data looks like. So what we're going to do with this once we create our visualizations is to use API, the API create command. So whenever you create a Plotly visualization, you'll be able to just run this command to send your graphs to Plotly. So once you do that, you could see that the graph is showing up in its own separate window. And this just shows that it got sent to my Plotly account. So if I were to go to my files, I'll be able to see where I posted this. So in this case, I have a separate webinar folder, and I'm able to see the graph that I just sent. So this one is my bar chart, but I have older versions of the other charts that I'm sending out. And just to quickly overview, go over the syntax, Plotly utilizes piping within R, so you're able to add in your data and add different traces, and then edit your layout. So you could see we're kind of building a Plotly visualization in a stepwise motion. If we had multiple charts, we would be able to just add multiple traces and just be able to get that much richer a visualization. I'm just trying to make sure that the screen is showing up correctly. So hopefully that fixed the issue with the screen showing up in split screen. Really, all I've been doing was going through some of this code, so hopefully that didn't detract too much from seeing what I've been doing. So basically, the way that you're able to add these traces, you define your type. So whether you're building a bar chart, a box plot, any sort of chart type, and also mapping your variables. So in this way, it works similar to what you're able to do with ggplot, where you have your variables mapped, and you're able to show your you're able to just simply add your traces in that way. Hopefully that finally fixed the issue that we're having. So you're able to, as I mentioned, just add that trace and then begin to make layout changes. So the layout changes affect the entire graph, not just individual traces. So things like your title, x-axis, y-axis settings. And you can see here I'm actually using this to make sure that my states are in a particular order. I wanted the graph to show them in descending order so that you're able to more easily make those comparisons. So similarly, you're able to create other graphs and send those to your account. So for the second graph, we're just looking at a box plot, and we're going to be making a comparison of employment among these different companies. So this is more of a summary graph, and now we're going to delve in a bit to the various measures that we have associated with each of these companies, and looking at the distribution of employment. So similarly to before, you could just look at this in an exploratory sort of way within RStudio. You're able to just view your graph in your viewer right here. In this case, we're just defining our type to be box and mapping our variables accordingly. So in this case, we're separating these companies by industry. And because this is New York, we're sort of delving into New York. I forgot to mention we were doing that. And then just adding that trace and changing some layout settings. So very similar to what we did before. And we'll just send that over to our Plotly account. So one note in terms of how to use Plotly for R, I won't go into too much detail for the next two charts, but you're able to access the R reference page at plotly/R. And by looking here, you're able to see essentially a layout of different chart types, and you're able to just select which plot type you're building and see tons of helpful examples. So this is a great resource if you're getting started with the API and you or you have a specific goal in mind. You want to create a specific kind of chart, and you just want to get an idea of how that works within R. So this just gives you a lot of working examples that you could then build on top of to create your charts. So you could see how a lot of these are being used, and you'll get a good idea through looking at these examples of how the Plotly API is designed overall. So to go through the last two graphs, next, if we're looking at the health of the New York economy, we may want to take a look at housing prices and see how these various company trends are, either affecting or not affecting housing prices. So we could just take a look at a new data set, in this case, just looking at housing prices. And this is utilizing the automatic grouping of Plotly. So we're starting the same way, adding the data frame, and that's going to inform the formulas within our add traces, add lines functions following. And in addition to choosing our X and Y, we're adding this color variable. So if you look at the structure of the data, we have a time series, we have our housing price index, and we have the housing types divided by tier. So in this case, this is a pretty standard format for data to be in, and this lets us easily group by a certain variable and get the graph that we want. So having 3 housing tiers, one would expect 3 traces like this. So similarly, we'll send this to our Plotly account. And lastly, we'll just look at a heat map to give us another comparison of what's happening overall in a lot of our states. So we'll be looking at industry versus state, and just kind of use a heat map to get an idea of, and in this case, we're looking at revenue. So we'll get an idea of which industries have the strongest revenues in which states, what the distribution across different industries look like in each state, and vice versa, looking at industries across states and that distribution. So we're just manipulating the data a bit more. This is that same data set, just making it into a heat map format. So you can see we're just looking at state versus industry. And that's what I'm doing over here. And once I create that, you could see, again, a preview of what it is that we're looking at. We have our various revenue measures, and already right off the bat, we could see where we have hotspots of industries. So you could see states with stronger economies. You could see industries that are stronger in certain states. So this gives us a nice two-dimensional view of that. And then similarly to before, we're using, in this case, for graphs 3 and 4, I introduced the specific functions, so add lines and add heat maps. If you add trace, you could always just define what your type is going to be, but there are some ready-made functions that make it easy to add various chart types. So in this case, all I'm working with is mapping my data variables. So I have my Z, and then defining what my X and Y row names and column names are going to be. Then lastly, I'll API create this and send this over to my Plotly account. And so now that we have all of our files sent to our Plotly account, we're going to create a dashboard. And once again, we're going to end up with something that looks similar to this. So if you want to create a dashboard, you just hover over this create, and you get to choose which file type you want to work with. So like I mentioned, you are able to create and edit charts, data sets, various different file types, but we're going to be focusing on dashboards this time. So when we go here, you start out with a blank dashboard, and you'll get started by adding various elements. So here you can see the 3 elements that we have. We're able to add plots, text, or web pages via iframe. So plots are pretty easy to just capture from your account. So you could see that I could just select a plot here. So we could start out adding our bar chart. And you could see that you have the ability to begin moving these around. So we only have 1 plot. That doesn't really give us much freedom in terms of layout, but we could just add some more and begin to manipulate our layout. So you're able to pretty easily just drag and drop these graphs wherever you want. Change the heights, change the width, and just continue adding different plots. So we'll add our 3rd and 4th plots. You're able to get pretty fine-tuned with the layout. So if I wanted something like this, where I have a more vertically oriented bar chart here, and I wanted to kind of get a more complex mosaic going, I'm able to just simply move that to where it's desired and display my plot there. So this works with any plots that you're adding, as well as any other elements. So if you wanted to add a text element, you would be able to add it using this method. The great thing about the text fields is they are Markdown supported. So you're able to use various Markdown to kind of style your text and get different headers, get different bullet points. You also have the ability to use what's over here to help with your formatting. And once you're done, you just hit save and move that over here. In terms of creating a dashboard, this is pretty much the we've hit on really the major points of creating a dashboard. So within minutes, as you see, you're able to just add the graphs to your dashboard, and then once you reach this stage, it comes down to fine-tuning your style. So if you go over the settings over here, you're able to add things such as logos. So here I have the New York State flag that we could add. You could change the title. And you could change various colors and text and layout. So when you're looking at your, so here, for example, to get the background to match roughly what we had here, I'm able to just simply make those changes using a drop-down like this. That's kind of roughly where we ended up. Once you've created your dashboard, you're able to save it. So we could just save this as our New York Economic Barometer. And you could change, and at this step, you could set the privacy of your graph. So you can see the 3 levels of privacy: public, private, as well as private link. And these correspond to different restrictions. So private means that it's only viewable to people that you share your dashboard with. Public means that anyone on the web can view it, and it's added to the Plotly community. And then private link means it's private, not indexed, won't be able to be searchable. But if someone has the unique URL along with a share key, they'll be able to view the graph, view the dashboard or graph. And then you have this share modal here where you're able to add collaborators. So you add people by username. So here I've added a colleague of mine, or you could access the link. So if you do have a private link, you could see that a share key gets appended to that. And one last thing to show off is the update portion of this webinar. So I mentioned that the key point here is to create and update your dashboards. And once you create something like this, it's great for a way of sharing sharing data, sharing analysis that you're working with, but in order to truly see the power of what you could do with this, you could update graphs as data gets new. So you can imagine if you have a time series, you get new data coming in, you'll be adding new observations. Or if you have, in this case, we're looking at company records. So if new companies get added, then we'll be able to update the underlying data. And that could be done straight from R. So we'll actually go to our first graph here, and we'll just, for the sake of sort of showing what's happening, we'll be just simply changing some of the layout of the graph. So rather than changing the data, we'll just change the color of our bars. So we'll make these orange. And now you could see that we just have a restyled graph. And the key to updating your graph is this file name argument within API create. What this does is this sends it to a particular Plotly file name and updates that chart with with what you newly created. So if I send this off, you'll see and actually, if you've noticed, you've been seeing those warning messages saying that this already exists and it's overwriting it, which is what we want in this case. We want to be able to continually overwrite our charts with new data as new information is coming to light. And it pops up here, but more importantly, if I go to my dashboard and I refresh, you'll see that that new graph showed up here. So again, it's kind of meaningless that we just changed the color of the trace, but you could obviously imagine this sort of extending to adding new data and plotting an update to that. So someone would be able to bookmark a dashboard like this and be assured that they're getting the most recent data when they're looking at it. So using nothing but R and Plotly, you're able to kind of create a live view of a live dashboard, a live view of your analysis. So that concludes our webinar. And I'll just go here for a few questions. So I'm just looking at the chat. So one question I see in the chat is plots that are not generated using Plotly will also work well. Will they also work within the dashboard? Plotly dashboards are meant to work with Plotly charts. So it's you're able to whenever you see a a plot type, like clicking on the plot button to add it to a dashboard, those refer to Plotly charts. You are able to include any other web content via an iframe, so that would include if you have charts created by other means. But in terms of having it be plugged into the plot type, that's it would have to be a Plotly plot. And we also have the question: can you create these dashboards with the Plotly free account? You absolutely can, and the main difference between free accounts, free community accounts, and professional and enterprise accounts are just sort of API limits, so the number of times you're able to call an API, and more importantly, the ability to create private charts. So with a free account, you won't be able to create private charts. But you will be able to create community dashboards and community plots. So we have one question: are there ways to make the graphs interactive? So there are, and let me share my screen just to show off. Just to show off a few functionality, a few points of functionality. So you are able to add some simple controls to Plotly graphs. So here you could see things like buttons, range sliders, and drop-down events. So this goes through a few examples of what you're able to do there. These are pretty much tied to the graphs themselves. So you could see like you essentially have a Plotly visualization and you're adding a control to that graph. So things like dashboard, things like drop downs, range sliders, etc. Those are being added on a plot by plot basis. You are able to get some pretty compelling graphs using those types of controls, but and this is just showing off an example of kind of the most sophisticated. You're able to get a dashboard, so using things like range sliders, animation, buttons to show off a bit more of what you're looking at. And when you're able to add these controls in terms of more sophisticated controls, so things like multiple drop downs or really adding more sophisticated logic to your dashboards. We'll actually in the next webinar we'll be going through our Dash framework, which at the moment is only available in Python, but it essentially provides a full-fledged web app framework, which allows you to really build truly sophisticated interactive apps. So we have a few more questions here. Using the API offline, when I was going through the API in R and we were viewing the graphs in the lower right-hand side, essentially everything before we used API create, that's using the API offline. So it absolutely is possible to use it offline in kind of that exploratory way. And I didn't go through this in this webinar. This is another question from Scott. If there is a function that converts ggplot objects to Plotly plot, those are available. So there's a function called ggplotly, which just simply does that conversion for you. But that's a very good point in terms of the interoperability of ggplot, translating that to Plotly. This lecture will be saved for later viewing. And then another question in terms of sharing a Plotly dashboard with a customer. I went through the share modal, how you're able to share it with another Plotly user. So at first brush, if that customer is a Plotly subscriber, you'll be able to just share it in that same way. You're also able to just simply copy and paste the link. So when I created my dashboard, it lives at its own unique URL, and you would be able to send that to a customer. And then in terms of the maximum number of updates per second for a dashboard, I don't know what the exact granularity is there, but as you saw how it works, it's essentially utilizing a REST API through R. So one could imagine that you have a cron job set up with an R script, and it's you could set the frequency of that to whatever you want, but essentially those updates that come through, a user would have to refresh to see that change. So really, that's what I would see as the main kind of sort of choke point there for a number of updates. If you do have an on-premise Plotly, we do have a streaming API that comes with that, so that has a 50 millisecond resolution. But in terms of using the REST API, it's you could set the cron job however frequently you want, but the main choke point would just be how the user is refreshing that. So in other words, that can't really function as a streaming service. Do we have any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and hope to see you next time. Hope everyone has a great day.